I folded my navy evening gown into my suitcase, smoothing out the expensive silk. It was a beautiful dress. I bought it specifically for the captain dinner on the Mediterranean cruise. I am 68 years old, and I spent 40 years running my own garden centers. I built a regional chain of nurseries from a single greenhouse. I spent my life with dirt under my fingernails, negotiating with soil vendors and fighting off corporate competitors. I figured I had finally earned a week of pure luxury. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up expecting a text message from my son Bradley. He was supposed to pick me up in 2 hours for the drive to the airport. Instead, I saw a message that stopped the breath in my chest. Plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise. Stephanie wants only her family. We will talk when we get back. I stared at the glowing screen. I read the words 3 times to make sure my eyes were not failing me. My son sent me a text message uninviting me from a family vacation on the very morning we were supposed to fly out to Barcelona. He did not call. He did not have the courage to come over and look me in the eye. He just sent a cowardly text. Stephanie was his wife. Stephanie wanted only her family. Stephanie wanted her parents and her sister on the ship. But Stephanie did not pay for this cruise. I paid for this cruise, $25,000. I paid for the luxury suites with the ocean view balconies. I paid for the premium dining packages. I paid for the private vineyard tours in Italy and the exclusive helicopter excursion in Monaco. I paid for all of it because Bradley sat at my kitchen table 2 months ago and told me his budget was tight this year. He said he really wanted the kids to experience Europe before they grew up. I wrote the check because I loved my family. My hands were not shaking. That was the very first thing I noticed. After decades of managing aggressive suppliers and handling unpredictable weather that could destroy my inventory overnight, I learned how to stay perfectly calm when disaster struck. I did not cry. I did not call Bradley to beg or demand an explanation. I just looked at my packed suitcase and felt a profound, chilling clarity wash over me. They thought I was just a lonely widow desperate for their company. They thought they could secure the expensive tickets and then push me aside like an unwanted piece of luggage. I closed my suitcase and zipped it shut. Then I walked over to my heavy oak desk and opened my laptop. My husband passed away 4 years ago. After the funeral, Bradley started treating me like I was fragile. Stephanie started treating me like an inconvenience, but neither of them realized that I still managed my own wealth. I sold my garden centers for a substantial profit. I know how to read a ledger. And more importantly, I know exactly how credit card holds work. I logged into my Platinum banking portal. The initial deposits for the cruise had cleared months ago. That money was already gone to the cruise line. But the rest of it was a different story. The room upgrades, the luxury excursions, the return flights, and the onboard spending accounts were all tied directly to my primary credit card. They were pending charges scheduled to clear once the ship officially left the port. I clicked on the Card Management tab. I selected the option for Lost or Stolen Card. The system asked if I wanted to freeze the account and decline all pending transactions. I clicked yes. Then I picked up my phone and called the cruise line directly. A cheerful customer service agent named David answered the phone. "I need to make an adjustment to a group booking," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "My name is Clara, and I am the primary account holder." I gave him the long booking reference number. "I see your reservation," Clara David said. 4 luxury suites. You sail out this evening from Barcelona. How can I help you?" "I am no longer taking the trip," I told him. "I need to cancel my personal ticket. But more importantly, I am revoking the payment method on file for the remaining passengers." There was a long pause on the line. "Just to be clear," David said, sounding slightly confused, "you are removing the credit card linked to their onboard spending accounts and their return flights." "That is exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "If they do not provide a new payment method at the purser desk upon boarding, their excursions and premium drink packages will be automatically canceled," David warned. "And they will have to purchase their own return flights from Europe at the current market rate." "That sounds like a problem for them to solve," I said. "Please confirm the payment method has been removed immediately." David processed the request and emailed me the confirmation. I hung up the phone. Bradley and Stephanie thought they were going on a fully funded luxury vacation across the Mediterranean. They were about to find out they had no excursions, no premium food, and absolutely no way to fly home. But freezing the cruise payments was only the beginning. The disrespect in that text message went far deeper than a ruined vacation. It was a symptom of a much larger disease I had ignored for too long. Bradley and Stephanie lived in a sprawling 5-bedroom house in the best school district in the county. It featured a 3-car garage, a custom swimming pool, and an outdoor kitchen. I owned that house. I bought it for cash 8 years ago when Bradley lost his job and needed a place to stay. I put the deed in my name, but allowed them to live there rent-free while he got back on his feet. He eventually got a new job in corporate management, but they never offered to pay rent. They just stayed. They upgraded their cars to European luxury models. Stephanie bought designer clothes and expensive handbags. They lived like millionaires on my dime while treating me like a nuisance to be swatted away. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a stack of legal forms I kept from my business days. I found a standard 30-day eviction notice. I filled it out carefully, writing Bradley and Stephanie down as the tenants. I signed the bottom with a steady hand. I would tape this notice to their custom mahogany front door. They would come back from their ruined vacation to find they had 30 days to pack up their designer clothes and leave my property forever. I grabbed my keys and drove across town. The mid-morning traffic was light. The suburban streets were quiet and lined with manicured lawns and expensive landscaping. I pulled into their wide paver driveway. The house looked perfect from the outside, a beautiful monument to a successful American family, but I knew the foundation was completely rotten. I sat behind the wheel for several seconds before starting the engine. The eviction notice lay on the passenger seat beside my purse, a plain sheet of paper that suddenly felt heavier than any contract I had signed during my business career. Until that morning, I had always separated Bradley's selfishness from genuine malice. I told myself he was immature, that Stephanie pushed him too hard, that success had come too easily and warped his sense of gratitude. That explanation no longer survived the text message on my phone. He had accepted a $25,000 vacation from me, waited until the morning of departure, and then erased me from it because his wife preferred the cleaner picture of a family without the woman paying the bill. It was not an accident. It was a decision made after weeks of planning, and the calmness of that realization hardened something inside me. As I drove through the neighborhood, I passed the garden center where my first delivery truck used to stop every Thursday before sunrise. I remembered hauling 50-pound bags of soil with my husband when we were both young enough to believe exhaustion was temporary. We had built everything slowly. 1 greenhouse became 2. 2 became a retail lot. The retail lot became 7 stores, commercial land, retirement accounts, and the kind of financial security Bradley had mistaken for an endless family faucet. I had never minded helping him when help meant keeping a roof over his children's heads or paying a medical bill during a difficult year. What I minded now was the assumption that my work had somehow become his property before I was dead. The closer I came to the house, the more details from the last few years rearranged themselves into a pattern I should have recognized sooner. Stephanie had begun asking oddly specific questions about my investment accounts. Bradley had wanted copies of old deeds because he claimed he was helping Lucas with a college project about real estate. At Christmas, he had casually asked whether I had ever considered giving him authority to pay bills if I became sick. I had laughed and told him I was perfectly capable of paying my own bills. He laughed too, but I remembered now how quickly his smile disappeared. At the time, those moments seemed harmless. In the cold light of that morning, they looked like measurements taken by people deciding where to cut. I turned onto Bradley Street and reduced my speed. Every lawn was clipped to the same precise height. Every mailbox looked newly painted. The neighborhood had been designed to project control, stability, and quiet wealth. Bradley loved that image. He loved telling coworkers he lived in one of the best school districts in the county. He never mentioned that his mother owned the house or that he had not paid $1 of rent in 8 years. I used to protect his pride by remaining silent. That silence had become another thing he interpreted as weakness. At the end of the block, I stopped at a red light and looked again at his text. Plans changed. You are not coming on the cruise. Stephanie wants only her family. The sentence did not hurt the same way anymore. The first sting had passed. What remained was information. They considered me useful only when I was paying. They expected me to remain obedient even after being humiliated. Most importantly, they expected me to be too emotional to act quickly. That was their mistake. I parked in the driveway and switched off the engine. For one last moment, I considered simply leaving the eviction notice on the door and going home. 30 days, a clean legal separation. No shouting, no scene, no family spectacle. It would have been enough if the cruise had been the only betrayal. I picked up the notice, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the porch with the steady pace I had used before difficult negotiations for 40 years. Then I saw that the front door was not fully closed. A narrow black line separated the mahogany door from the frame. I stopped. Bradley was obsessive about locks. He checked the front door twice every night and installed an expensive alarm system he enjoyed showing off to visitors. Yet the door stood slightly open on the morning of an international trip. For the first time since receiving the text, my calm was interrupted by a sharp, instinctive warning. Something inside that house had gone wrong before they left. I tightened my grip on the eviction notice, pushed the door inward, and stepped into the silence. I stepped through the heavy front door of the suburban house I had purchased for my son 8 years ago. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind me. I stood perfectly still on the imported Italian tile and listened to the deep silence of the empty house. My hand gripped the 30-day eviction notice I had printed from my home office. I fully intended to leave that piece of paper on the custom kitchen island and lock the doors behind me. But the silence in the house felt fundamentally wrong. It was not the peaceful quiet of a family departing for a luxury Mediterranean vacation. It was a frantic, disrupted silence. Suitcases had clearly been dragged down the sweeping staircase in a rush, leaving dark rubber scuff marks on the pristine oak steps. A half-empty cup of coffee sat abandoned on the entryway console table, staining the expensive wood. Stephanie always insisted on everything looking perfectly curated for her country club friends, but today her house looked like the site of a sudden evacuation. I took a step toward the kitchen when a sudden loud crash echoed from the second floor. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, clutching the eviction notice tightly in my hand. I thought they were already at the airport. Their flight to Barcelona was scheduled to depart in exactly 2 hours. Grandma. The voice cracked raw and terrified from the top of the stairs. I looked up and saw my grandson Lucas gripping the wooden banister. He was 19 years old, and he was Bradley's son from his first marriage. Lucas was a brilliant young man studying finance and cybersecurity at the State University. He had declined the free cruise because he secured a highly competitive summer internship at a corporate wealth management firm downtown. Stephanie had constantly mocked him for staying behind, but Lucas had always possessed a work ethic his father entirely lacked. Right now, Lucas did not look like a confident college student. He looked like he was going to be physically sick. His face was completely drained of color, and he was holding a thick stack of papers against his chest. "Lucas," I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level, "what are you doing here today? I thought you were at your internship." He scrambled down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He nearly tripped over his own feet before stopping right in front of me. He was breathing heavily, and his eyes darted frantically toward the front door, as if he expected his father to walk back inside. "Did he text you?" Lucas asked, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Did my dad text you this morning?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "He sent me a message saying Stephanie only wanted her immediate family on the trip. I came to leave an eviction notice. I froze their cruise payments an hour ago." Lucas grabbed my arm. His fingers dug into my sleeve with terrifying urgency. "Forget the cruise, Grandma. The cruise means absolutely nothing. You need to come into the office right now. You need to see what I just found." He did not wait for my response. He pulled me down the wide hallway past the formal dining room and straight toward Bradley's home office. Bradley always kept this specific room locked up tight. He told his friends his corporate management position required intense confidentiality. He treated that single room like a fortified bunker. But today, the heavy wooden doors stood wide open. "Stephanie could not find her passport," Lucas explained. Talking so fast, he stumbled over his own words. They completely panicked. They tore the entire master bedroom apart and then tore through the kitchen. They finally found it stuffed inside a random drawer, but they were running so incredibly late for the airport. Dad was screaming at everyone to get in the car. He forgot to lock his sanctuary. He forgot to spin the dial on the safe. We stepped into the office space. It smelled strongly of stale coffee and expensive leather furniture. Bradley had decorated the room to look like the suite of a chief executive officer, despite only holding a mid-level management title. I bypassed the massive oak desk and the plush visitor chairs. My attention instantly locked onto the wall directly behind his computer monitors. A large framed landscape painting usually hung perfectly centered on that wall. Right now, the heavy frame was shoved violently to the side, hanging at a completely crooked angle. The displaced artwork exposed a square steel wall safe built directly into the drywall. The thick metal door of the safe was hanging wide open, revealing dark, empty shelves inside. "I swear I was just trying to close it for him," Lucas said, hovering nervously near my shoulder. I walked into the room to shut everything down, and I saw the metal safe standing open. I noticed a file folder sticking out of the bottom rack. I was going to push the papers back inside and lock the handle, but I saw your name, Grandma. I saw your full legal name printed in bold black ink on the top tab of the file. So I opened it and I started reading. Lucas held out the thick stack of premium legal paper. His hands were trembling so aggressively the pages rustled together, making a sound like dry autumn leaves. I set my purse and the eviction notice down on the desk. I took my reading glasses from my pocket and slid them into place. I have spent 40 years building a massive regional chain of garden centers from a single dirt floor greenhouse. I have navigated aggressive commercial real estate acquisitions. I have fought off ruthless corporate developers trying to buy my prime retail land. I know exactly how to read and dissect a legal contract. I took the top document from my grandson. The first page was a highly detailed property deed transfer. It listed the exact block and lot address of the sprawling suburban house we were currently standing inside. The document outlined a complete and total transfer of legal ownership. It moved the property from my personal name into a newly formed limited liability company. I scanned down to the section listing the managing directors of that new corporate entity. The names printed clearly on the authorization line were Bradley and Stephanie. I felt a cold, sharp stone of betrayal settle deep in my stomach. But I did not allow myself to panic. I simply flipped the page to the second document in the stack. This one was far more devastating than a single residential home. It was another comprehensive deed transfer. But this paperwork did not list a suburban house in a nice neighborhood. It listed the commercial property addresses for all 7 of my operating garden centers. It detailed the highly valuable commercial land that generated my entire passive income and funded my comfortable retirement. They were actively attempting to transfer my entire life work into their private shell company without my knowledge or consent. My hands finally began to tremble, not from fear, but from a sudden rising tide of absolute fury. I had given my son every advantage in life, and he was secretly plotting to steal the very dirt I had cultivated for 4 decades. But it was the third document in the file that made the polished mahogany room spin around me. It was a durable financial and medical power of attorney. The paperwork was extensive, covering a dozen pages of dense legal terminology. It granted my son Bradley absolute unconditional control over every single aspect of my life. It gave him the unchecked legal authority to manage my real estate holdings, to liquidate my diversified stock portfolios, to access my private offshore accounts, and to make binding decisions regarding my health and future living arrangements. It effectively stripped me of all my legal rights as an independent adult citizen. I looked at the signature line at the very bottom of the final page. My signature was there. It was a perfect, flawless forgery. Whoever signed it had captured the exact looping style of my first letter and the sharp, distinct angle of my last name. Beside my forged signature was a bright blue notary stamp. It was an official legal seal provided by an active, licensed notary public, making the entire fraudulent document appear completely legitimate to any bank or state court in the country. They had planned this for weeks, maybe months. They had hired professionals. They had practiced my signature until they perfected it. They were systematically dismantling my financial fortress while I was busy picking out evening gowns for a family cruise. But the most chilling part of the discovery was a smaller packet attached to the very back of the power of attorney. It was a formal medical evaluation, printed on the official heavy cardstock letterhead of a local private neurological clinic. It was signed by a physician I had never met in my entire life. I read the physician notes carefully, line by agonizing line. The evaluation stated in clear clinical terms that I was suffering from severe advanced cognitive decline. It claimed I was exhibiting aggressive paranoia and early-stage dementia. The doctor officially declared that I was completely incapable of managing my own complex financial affairs and that I posed a physical danger to myself if left to live independently. "They are stealing absolutely everything," I whispered. My voice did not shake. It was perfectly cold and hard as iron. Lucas let out a ragged, broken breath. A single tear tracked down his pale face. "I heard them talking last night, Grandma. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water late at night, and they were out on the back patio drinking expensive wine. They thought I was sound asleep in my room. Stephanie was laughing so hard she spilled her drink. She said leaving you behind on the cruise today was the absolute perfect distraction. I looked up from the forged signature and asked him exactly what he meant. Lucas pointed a shaking finger at the fake medical evaluation in my hands. Stephanie said if you were sitting at home alone today, feeling hurt and upset about being uninvited from the vacation, you would not bother to check your business accounts. She told my dad that by the time they get back from sailing around Europe, the financial transfers will be totally complete and legally binding. She said they are going to use that medical paper to force you into a locked memory care facility the very day they return. She joked about packing your bags for the nursing home. I stared at my grandson, absorbing the sheer calculated malice of their master plan. They did not just want my accumulated wealth. They wanted to erase my independence entirely. They wanted to lock me in a secure medical ward where no one would believe a single word I said. They would simply tell the doctors I was terribly confused and had forgotten I willingly gave them my entire estate. It was a flawless trap designed to bury me alive while they lived like royalty on the money I bled to earn. I checked the specific dates printed next to the blue notary stamp. The forgery was finalized and stamped just 2 days ago. The trap was already springing shut. Lucas, I said, setting the heavy documents down on the polished mahogany desk. When do these legal transfers actually process through the banking system? A property deed takes a few days to clear the county clerk office, but a power of attorney grants immediate access to liquid funds. Lucas wiped his face and stepped quickly around the desk. He grabbed the wireless mouse on Bradley's computer, and the large monitor instantly glowed to life. Bradley was in such a frantic rush to make his international flight, he left his secure browser completely open. I checked the online banking portal on his computer right before you walked in the front door, Lucas said. His voice was steadying now, replacing his earlier fear with a righteous anger. The property deeds are still pending review. But the liquid assets, the actual cash in your main investment portfolio, they set up an automated wire transfer using the forged power of attorney credentials. When does the wire transfer execute? I demanded, stepping much closer to the bright screen. Lucas pointed to a pending transaction line highlighted in bright warning yellow. Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock. They are moving your entire primary portfolio into an offshore holding account the absolute second the bank opens tomorrow. Once it hits that offshore account, it will be nearly impossible to recover the funds. I looked at the digital screen. My son was currently sitting on a luxury flight sipping complimentary champagne and believing he had just executed the perfect financial crime. He believed I was a naive, elderly woman who would sit at home crying over a canceled cruise while he dismantled my entire life. He forgot where he came from. He forgot that I built a multi-million-dollar business by outsmarting ruthless suppliers and crushing aggressive corporate buyers. I knew exactly how to rip up poisonous weeds by the root. I stood in that silent office and felt the last remaining shred of maternal affection for my son completely evaporate into nothing. For years I had made quiet excuses for his endless entitlement. When he failed out of his first management job, I bought him this house so his children would not have to move away. When he accumulated massive credit card debt, I paid it off quietly to protect his precious credit score. I always believed I was helping him stabilize his life. Instead, I had been foolishly funding a predator who was patiently waiting for me to show a single moment of weakness. Stephanie was clearly the architect of the cruelty, but Bradley was the one who actually signed the fraudulent paperwork. He was the one who looked at the woman who gave him life and decided I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and a vast fortune he did not earn. The threat of the locked memory care facility was the most vicious part of their strategy. I have visited friends in those tragic facilities. I have seen the blank stares and the heavy locked doors. I have heard the agonizing cries of people who know they are trapped but lack the legal agency to walk out the front door. Bradley intended to weaponize my age against me. He intended to strip away my fundamental human rights simply because it was financially convenient for his wife. I looked at Lucas. He was standing tall now, his shoulders squared. He was the only piece of my son that had turned out right. He had recognized the terrible danger, and he had chosen to stand with me instead of securing his own massive inheritance. We are not just going to stop this wire transfer, I told Lucas, keeping my eyes locked on the glowing monitor. We are going to sever every single financial tie your father possesses. By the time that cruise ship docks back in the United States, he will not own a company, he will not have a bank account, and he absolutely will not have this house. I nodded and picked up the thick folder of forged documents. The battle lines were clearly drawn. I was ready to go to war. The blue glow from the oversized computer monitor cast long, harsh shadows across my son's corporate home office. The room was perfectly silent, except for the rapid, aggressive clicking of my grandson typing on the mechanical keyboard. I stood quietly behind his heavy leather executive chair and watched complex lines of data scroll across the large screen. I did not fully understand the technical process Lucas was executing, but I understood the absolute, unwavering determination burning in his eyes. He was systematically dissecting his own father's digital life to protect me. Bradley always projected an outward image of total corporate dominance. He wore tailored suits that cost $2,000 and drove a pristine German sports car. He spoke constantly at family dinners about high-level security and executive privilege. Yet it took his 19-year-old son less than 12 minutes to completely bypass his desktop firewall. Lucas explained in a quiet, steady voice that Bradley had used the exact same basic password for his local administrator account as he used for his daily streaming services. Arrogance always breeds dangerous carelessness. Lucas accessed the primary email client. He completely bypassed the standard inbox and went directly into the hidden system files. He found an encrypted archive folder nested deep within the local drive. Bradley had titled the folder simply Estate Planning. It was a remarkably mundane and boring label for a digital vault containing the exact blueprint to destroy my entire life. As the emails populated on the bright screen, my eyes scanned the various sender addresses. I fully expected to see endless correspondence between Bradley and his greedy, status-obsessed wife, Stephanie. I expected to see dark messages sent to the corrupt local doctor who had happily signed the fake medical evaluation, declaring me incompetent. What I absolutely did not expect to see was an email address ending in the official corporate domain of my own wealth management firm. I leaned closer to the monitor. The name attached to the email address made the breath completely vanish from my lungs. Paul Evans. Paul was not just a generic entry-level bank employee. He was my dedicated senior wealth manager. He had overseen my commercial accounts and private investments for 15 years. I used to sit in my living room and drink dark roast coffee with my late husband. He attended my summer barbecues and ate my food. He stood in the front row at my husband's funeral and shook my hand, telling me he would always make sure my financial future was completely secure and heavily protected. Lucas opened the very earliest email in the long chain. It was dated exactly 8 months ago. Bradley had reached out to Paul asking for a casual preliminary review of my total liquid assets, claiming he was trying to help me plan for the future. Paul responded by violating every single fiduciary duty and privacy law in the entire banking industry. He sent my son a highly detailed confidential spreadsheet outlining the exact cash value of my 7 garden centers, my commercial real estate holdings, and my private stock portfolios. The betrayal was so profound it felt like a heavy physical weight pressing down on my chest. Paul had essentially handed my son a detailed menu of my life work and warmly invited him to place an order. The emails grew progressively more aggressive and demanding as the months went on. Lucas clicked through a dozen long message threads, highlighting the rapidly escalating conspiracy. Stephanie was heavily involved in the daily correspondence. She sent Paul frantic, demanding messages, wanting to know exactly how quickly cold, hard cash could be extracted from my secondary business accounts. I read a message from Stephanie complaining bitterly that her country club friends were taking a luxury ski trip to the Swiss Alps, and she desperately needed $60,000 to cover the first-class travel expenses and a brand-new winter wardrobe. She wrote in plain text that it was completely unfair for a stubborn old woman to sit on millions of dollars doing absolutely nothing, while a young, vibrant family struggled to maintain their proper social standing in the neighborhood. Bradley emails were far more desperate and chaotic. Lucas opened a heavily encrypted document that Bradley had sent directly to Paul, marked as highly urgent. It was a severe margin call notice from a high-risk online brokerage firm. Bradley had been secretly day trading highly volatile tech stocks on margin, and he had lost absolutely everything. He was nearly $400,000 in debt, and the aggressive brokers were actively threatening legal action and property liens. My son was financially drowning because of his own reckless, fragile ego, and his wife was screaming at him for more luxury goods. Instead of downsizing their lavish life or coming to me to ask for honest help, they decided to butcher my estate and feed off the pieces. "Grandma, look at this," Lucas said, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. He clicked on a secure document finalized just 3 weeks ago. It was a commercial line of credit approval form. The bank had approved a massive institutional loan for $800,000. The collateral listed on the formal loan documents consisted of 3 of my most profitable commercial nursery properties. The specific land where I grew prize-winning roses and imported fruit trees was now legally burdened by almost $1 million of toxic, fraudulent debt. How did he get a commercial loan against my physical property without my actual signature in the room? I asked, my voice tight with suppressed rage. Lucas pulled up the very next email in the chain to find the answer. "Paul pushed it through the commercial lending department himself," Lucas explained, pointing to a message from the wealth manager. "Paul told the bank underwriters that you were actively restructuring your business for early retirement and that Bradley was taking over the daily financial operations. Paul used his senior executive authority to bypass the standard identity verification protocols. He attached an early draft of the forged power of attorney to satisfy the loan officers and push the funds through." I stared at the glowing screen in utter disbelief. The $800,000 had already been fully dispersed by the bank. It was immediately routed into a joint checking account controlled exclusively by Bradley and Stephanie. They had used my beloved garden centers to pay off Bradley disastrous stock market debts and to fund Stephanie ridiculous Swiss Alps vacation. They had quite literally mortgaged the rich soil I worked with my own 2 hands to finance their delusional artificial lifestyle. But the $800,000 commercial loan was just the appetizer. The main course was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Lucas opened the final email in the hidden folder. It was marked with high importance and sent from Paul just yesterday afternoon. The message was brief and sickeningly cheerful. Paul wrote that the final version of the notarized power of attorney was perfectly in order and ready for deployment. He confirmed that the fake medical evaluation satisfied the bank legal department regarding my sudden mental decline. He assured Bradley that the total liquidation of my primary investment portfolio would be manually authorized tomorrow morning. "I have the wire transfer queued up for exactly 9 in the morning," Paul wrote in the email. "The $6 million will move directly into the offshore trust company we established. Enjoy your family cruise, Bradley. When you get back to the States, the transition will be completely finished, and your mother will be safely relocated to the care facility. Drinks are on you next week." The sheer casual nature of the message made my blood run freezing cold. They were casually joking about buying expensive drinks while finalizing a master plan to steal $6 million and lock me in a psychiatric ward against my will. I stepped back from the heavy leather desk. The initial shock and the burning sting of betrayal were completely gone now. The sudden panic had burned away, leaving nothing behind but cold, hard, tactical clarity. I could not just tape a simple eviction notice to the front door and wait for them to return from Europe. If I simply kicked them out of this suburban house, they would still possess the offshore account and the massive loan taken against my commercial properties. I would be left fighting a costly, exhausting legal battle for years, trying to untangle the fraudulent debt Paul had firmly wrapped around my business. I had to cut the head off the snake before it could strike. Lucas finished downloading all the digital files onto his portable external hard drive. He secured the email chains, the IP logs, the forged documents, and the specific banking transfer codes. He unplugged the small device and slipped it safely into the front pocket of his backpack. He looked at me, waiting for his next set of instructions. "What is the actual plan?" Grandma Lucas asked. His eyes were wide but sharply focused. He had just watched his own father exposed as a common thief and a cowardly fraud, but he did not waver or break down. He was ready to fight. I looked at the digital clock in the bottom corner of the computer monitor. It was currently 8:15 in the evening. We had roughly 12 hours before Paul Evans walked into his pristine corner office at the bank and pressed the enter button that would permanently drain my entire life savings. "We are going to pay a very special visit to my trusted wealth manager," I said, buttoning my cardigan and adjusting my purse on my shoulder. Lucas grabbed his backpack and slung it over his back. "Are we taking this hard drive straight to the police station tonight?" "No," I replied instantly without any hesitation. "If we go to the police right now, they will launch a slow, methodical, careful investigation. They will file standard reports and request judicial warrants. The legal bureaucracy will take days to process. By the time a detective finally walks into that bank branch, Paul will have already pushed the massive wire transfer through and hidden the money in a shell company halfway across the world. The police cannot stop a ticking digital clock fast enough. I walked out of the home office and headed straight toward the grand foyer. I needed to move with absolute precision and unmatched aggression. We are going to be standing inside the main branch of the bank tomorrow morning at exactly 8:45, I told my grandson as we stepped out into the cool evening air. We are going to completely bypass the front tellers and walk directly into Paul's private office before he even has time to turn on his computer. "And what happens when we actually get in there?" Lucas asked, locking the heavy custom front door behind us. "I am going to introduce him to a very old friend of mine," I said, pulling my car keys from my purse. "Her name is Diane, and she destroys corporate careers for a living. She has been my primary business attorney for 20 years, and she takes financial fraud extremely personally. By the time the clock strikes 9 tomorrow morning, Paul Evans is going to do exactly what I tell him to do, or he is going to spend the rest of his natural life rotting in a federal prison cell." The next morning, I arrived at the bank at 8:41. The glass doors were still locked, and the lobby lights had only just come on. Lucas stood beside me with the external hard drive zipped inside his backpack. Diane arrived less than a minute later in a charcoal suit carrying a black leather briefcase. She did not waste time greeting us. She checked her watch, looked through the glass at the employees moving behind the counters, and said, "We had 19 minutes before the transfer window opened." I handed her the folder containing the forged power of attorney, the false medical evaluation, and printed copies of the most damaging emails Lucas had recovered. Diane had read the digital files overnight. She had also contacted an emergency judge, the bank's internal fraud counsel, and a senior compliance officer she knew from an old commercial litigation case. She explained that we had enough evidence to stop the transfer, but stopping it quietly at the source would give us the greatest chance of preserving the funds and documenting Paul's participation before he could destroy anything. At 8:45, the doors unlocked. A young security guard smiled automatically and welcomed us inside. We did not join the short line forming at the teller stations. Diane walked directly toward the private offices along the back wall as if she owned the building. An assistant stepped in front of us and asked whether we had an appointment with Mr. Evans. Diane produced a business card and said very calmly that if Paul Evans was inside the building, he needed to see Clara immediately, and if he was not, the assistant should call the branch president and the bank's legal department before touching another keyboard. The assistant's expression changed. She disappeared through a side door. Paul emerged less than 30 seconds later. He wore a navy suit and the same polished smile I had seen at investment reviews for 15 years, but the smile faltered when he saw Lucas and vanished completely when he saw Diane. His eyes dropped to the folder in my hands. For the briefest moment, his face showed recognition before he covered it with professional concern. "Clara," he said, "I did not know you were coming in this morning. Is something wrong?" I looked at the gold watch on his wrist. 8:46. "We need privacy," I said. Paul led us into his office and closed the door. The room had not changed since my last quarterly review. Framed financial certifications hung behind his desk. A photograph of Paul shaking hands with the bank's regional president sat beside a crystal award for client trust. I had once admired those symbols. Now they looked like props arranged by a man who had forgotten the meaning of every word printed on them. Paul sat behind his desk and gestured toward the chairs. I remained standing. Diane remained standing too. Lucas took the chair nearest the wall and opened his laptop without speaking. I placed the forged power of attorney in front of Paul. His eyes moved across the page and then back to me. He did not touch it. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "That was the wrong question," I replied. Paul inhaled slowly. Clara estate documents can look alarming when taken out of context. Bradley contacted me several months ago because he was concerned about continuity planning. At your age, it is responsible for a family to discuss contingencies. Diane opened her briefcase. At her age, she said Clara still owns the assets, makes her own decisions, and has never authorized Bradley to act for her. You are speaking to a woman who passed an independent cognitive screening at 6:30 this morning, witnessed by a licensed physician who has treated her for 12 years. So choose your next sentence very carefully. Paul's jaw tightened. I slid the false medical evaluation across the desk. The doctor named on the letterhead had declared me incompetent without ever meeting me. Then I added the first printed email, the one where Paul sent Bradley a confidential spreadsheet containing the exact values of my properties and investment accounts. Then another, and another. I placed them down one at a time until a neat stack formed in front of him. 8 months of emails, I said. Confidential account information, the fraudulent line of credit, the forged power of attorney, the $6 million transfer scheduled for 9 this morning. Paul finally reached for the papers. His fingers trembled. "This is not what it looks like," he said. Lucas turned his laptop so Paul could see the screen. "It is exactly what it looks like," Lucas said. "Every email includes the original header data. Every attachment has a creation timestamp. We copied the local mail archive directly from Dad's computer. I also preserved the authentication logs showing your bank account accessing the transfer queue yesterday afternoon." Paul stared at Lucas. Color drained from his face. "You accessed a private computer illegally," he said. Diane gave a short, humorless laugh. "That is the argument you want to make." Paul's mouth opened, then closed. Diane removed a yellow legal pad from her briefcase and placed it on the desk beside the emails. She spoke with the controlled precision of someone reading charges into a record. Unauthorized disclosure of confidential financial information, fraudulent use of a power of attorney, facilitation of identity theft, a commercial loan secured against property without the owner's consent, attempted wire transfer of $6 million into an offshore entity, financial exploitation of an elderly client, conspiracy. With every phrase, Paul's shoulders sank lower. "You have 2 immediate problems," Diane continued. "First, the transfer is scheduled to be manually authorized by you in less than 10 minutes. Second, I have already notified your bank's outside counsel that I am physically present in this branch with the victim and documentary evidence. If that transfer moves $1, this bank will know that you executed it after receiving direct notice of fraud." Paul looked toward his computer as though it had become an explosive device. "Clara," he said, his voice suddenly softer. "Bradley told me you wanted this. He said you were having memory problems and were embarrassed to discuss them. He said the family was trying to protect you." I stared at the man who had attended my husband's funeral. "Did Bradley also tell you I wanted $800,000 borrowed against my nursery properties so he could cover his gambling losses in the stock market?" Paul flinched. "Did he tell you I wanted Stephanie to spend my money on a ski trip and designer clothes?" He said nothing. "Did he tell you I wanted to be placed in a locked memory care facility while they controlled my estate?" Paul lowered his eyes. The silence answered for him. "For 15 years I said I trusted you with information I would not give most relatives. You sat in my kitchen. My husband trusted you. After he died, you told me you would protect me. And the first time my son offered you a path to profit from my age, you helped him build a cage around me." Paul stood abruptly and walked toward the office door. Diane moved before I did. She did not block him physically. She simply said his name. Paul stopped. "If you leave this room without securing the account and preserving the evidence," she said, "I will assume you are attempting to destroy records. The bank's legal department is already on its way down. Sit down." He sat. The digital clock on the corner of his monitor changed to 8:53. Paul loosened his tie. I could see sweat forming along his hairline. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want my money protected," I said. "I want every account connected to Bradley and Stephanie frozen from accessing funds tied to me. I want the pending $6 million wire stopped. I want the fraudulent commercial line of credit flagged and transferred to the bank's investigation unit. And I want every asset I legally control moved into a structure Bradley cannot reach with that forged document." Paul shook his head. "I cannot just move $6 million because you walk in and demand it. There are procedures." Diane opened another folder. "There are," she agreed. "That is why I prepared them." She placed a set of emergency trust documents on his desk. During the night, she had drafted a temporary, irrevocable asset protection trust with an independent corporate trustee and strict disbursement controls. The structure did not give Diane ownership of anything. It simply removed Bradley's ability to reach the portfolio through a personal power of attorney while the fraud investigation was active. I had already signed the documents in front of 2 independent witnesses and a notary that morning. Paul scanned the first page. "The transfer instructions require internal approval," he said. "Then obtain it," Diane replied. 8:55. Paul picked up his phone and dialed an internal extension. He asked for the branch president. His voice cracked halfway through the request. 2 minutes later, a gray-haired man named Richard Cole entered the office with the bank's regional compliance director and an internal attorney joining by speakerphone. Paul tried once more to control the narrative. He said a family dispute had arisen around estate planning documents and that Clara appeared upset by routine protective measures. Diane cut him off. "This is not a family dispute. Your employee participated in a documented fraud against his client. Here is the evidence. Here is Clara's sworn statement. Here is the physician's confirmation of competency. Here are the metadata logs. Here is the transfer number scheduled for 9 o'clock. You have 3 minutes to place an emergency fraud hold." Richard Cole looked at Paul, then at me. "Mrs. Clara," he said, "I need to hear directly from you. Did you sign the power of attorney presented to this bank?" "No." "Did you authorize Bradley to borrow against your commercial properties?" "No." "Did you authorize the $6 million transfer?" "No." "Did you authorize Paul Evans to provide your son with confidential portfolio information?" "No." Richard turned to the compliance director. "Freeze it all," he said. The clock changed to 8:58. The compliance director moved to Paul's computer and asked him to sign out. Paul hesitated. Richard repeated the instruction. Paul stood and stepped away from the desk. The compliance director entered her own credentials and opened the bank's fraud control system. I watched lines of account numbers appear on the screen. She selected the pending wire and placed it under emergency review. A red banner appeared across the transaction: suspended, client dispute, suspected identity theft. Lucas exhaled beside me. Then the compliance director opened the linked account map. Bradley's joint checking account, the line of credit, and the offshore beneficiary account all appeared as connected nodes. One by one, she placed restrictions on them. The system demanded confirmation codes. Richard approved them from his phone. 8:59. Paul stared at the clock. The $6 million wire remained suspended. 9 o'clock arrived without a sound. No alarm rang. No dramatic light flashed. The money simply did not move. For several seconds, nobody spoke. I had spent the previous night imagining that exact minute. I expected triumph, perhaps relief. Instead, I felt something quieter and heavier. My son had tried to steal the future my husband and I spent 40 years building. At 9 o'clock, that theft was supposed to become irreversible. Instead, the numbers remained exactly where they belonged. Diane tapped the trust documents. "Now protect the assets," she said. The internal attorney on speakerphone asked several procedural questions. Diane answered each one. The compliance director confirmed that because the power of attorney was now formally disputed and the client was present and competent, the bank could reject any future instructions submitted under Bradley's authority until a court ruled otherwise. The trust transfer could proceed under my direct instruction after enhanced identity verification. They verified me in every way available. I produced my passport, driver's license, business record, signature card, and a verbal security phrase I had created with Paul years earlier. The phrase was the name of the first rose variety my husband and I sold in our original greenhouse. Paul knew that. Bradley did not. By 9:27, the first internal transfer began. My primary investment portfolio moved from the vulnerable personal structure into the protected trust account. The money did not leave my ownership. It moved behind a legal wall Bradley could not cross with a forged signature. Paul sat silently while his career collapsed around him. Richard asked him for his badge and company phone. Paul looked at me. "Clara, please," he said. "I made a terrible mistake. Bradley said he would take care of you. He said the estate would stay in the family. I thought I was helping simplify things." "You thought you were helping yourself," I replied. His eyes filled with panic. "If this becomes criminal, I will lose everything." I considered that sentence. It was almost identical to what Bradley would have said. They had both treated my loss as an acceptable cost, right up until consequences threatened their own lives. "You were willing to let me lose everything I said. My money, my property, my freedom. You were willing to help them label me incompetent and lock me away. Do not ask me to protect you from the result of your choices." Before Richard escorted Paul to a conference room, Diane stopped the branch president and made one more demand. The bank needed to preserve Paul's workstation exactly as it stood. No one was to delete a message, clear a browser cache, replace a hard drive, or allow Paul to contact Bradley. Diane explained that the digital record was now evidence and that any alteration after notice could become obstruction. Richard immediately called information security and ordered Paul's computer isolated from the network. A technician arrived with tamper seals and photographed the desk, the monitor, and the open transfer screen. Paul watched the process with a gray expression. Diane then placed a blank statement form in front of him. "You have a choice," she said. "You can wait for investigators and say nothing, which is your legal right. Or you can document the truth while the records still match your memory. I am not promising immunity. I am telling you that cooperation will be accurately reported." Paul looked at Richard, then at me. His hands shook as he took the pen. He wrote for nearly 20 minutes. He admitted Bradley first approached him 8 months earlier under the pretense of planning for my future. He admitted sharing account values without my permission. He admitted knowing the line of credit relied on documents I had never signed in his presence. He admitted that Stephanie repeatedly pressured him to move faster because they needed cash. Most importantly, he admitted that the final medical evaluation arrived from Bradley rather than from any doctor who had examined me, and that he still used it to push the $6 million transfer through internal review. When he finished, Diane read every line before allowing him to sign it. Richard and the compliance director witnessed his signature. "Why did you do it?" I asked. Paul stared at the paper. "At first I thought Bradley would eventually inherit everything anyway," he said. "Then I crossed one line and had to cross another to hide the first. By the time I understood what they were planning, I was already part of it." That answer disturbed me more than a complicated excuse would have. There had been no grand threat, no secret blackmail, no extraordinary reason. He had simply decided that because I was 68 and Bradley was my son, my consent mattered less than his convenience. Diane slid the signed statement into a clear evidence sleeve. "That document does not erase what you did," she told him, "but it may prevent you from making it worse." As we prepared to leave, Richard promised that the bank would place a temporary hold on any foreclosure or collection action connected to the fraudulent $800,000 line of credit. The underlying debt still required formal investigation, but my nursery properties would not be seized while the bank examined Paul's misconduct. That mattered deeply to me. Those properties were not just numbers on a balance sheet. They were acres of soil my husband and I had walked together before sunrise, places where employees had raised families and customers had brought children to pick out their first tomato plants. The bank's internal attorney also confirmed that any future request presented under Bradley's power of attorney would route automatically to the fraud department rather than to a normal account officer. A warning flag was placed on my client profile requiring direct video or in-person verification for major transfers until the criminal matter was resolved. Diane made them put every promise in writing. Only after she had the documents did she close her briefcase. "This is what winning looks like before anyone gets handcuffed," she said quietly as we crossed the lobby. "You remove their leverage first, then you let the evidence speak." I understood. Revenge driven by anger would have meant screaming at Bradley over the phone. Protection required something colder. Every door he expected to open with my money was being locked before he even knew I had found the keys. Diane collected the original evidence into her briefcase. The bank attorney instructed Paul not to leave the premises until internal investigators arrived. Richard apologized to me repeatedly and promised a formal written report. I told him apologies would matter only if the bank corrected the fraudulent loan, restored every encumbrance on my property, and cooperated fully with law enforcement. Before we left, the compliance director printed a confirmation page showing the $6 million wire permanently canceled. She also printed the emergency restrictions on every account tied to Bradley and Stephanie. I folded those pages into my purse. At the office door, Paul spoke my name one last time. I turned. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. "Bradley is going to panic when he realizes the money did not move," he said. "He may try to file the power of attorney somewhere else." "I know," I replied. That was why this was not over. Diane and Lucas followed me through the lobby. Customers moved around us carrying deposit slips and coffee cups, unaware that a $6 million theft had just been stopped behind a closed glass door. When we stepped outside, the morning sunlight felt almost painfully bright. Diane checked her phone. The trust transfer was complete. The freeze was active. The fraudulent line of credit was under internal investigation. For the first time since Bradley's text arrived, my financial future was secure. But security was only defense. Bradley and Stephanie still believed they owned the house. They still believed the forged deed would give them a kingdom to return to after the cruise. I looked toward the parking lot and felt the next move settle into place with absolute clarity. Now I said we sell the house. I stepped out into the bright morning sunlight and took a deep breath of the crisp air. The financial web Paul had tried to spin was completely destroyed. The massive investment portfolio I had spent 40 years building was successfully transferred into an impenetrable blind trust and heavily guarded by Diane. My son and his greedy wife were currently sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, entirely cut off from the funds they believed they had stolen. But freezing their access to my wealth was only the defensive portion of my strategy. Now it was time to go on the offensive. I turned to Diane as we stood in the private parking lot of the bank. She was already slipping her digital tablet into her slim black briefcase. "The money is safe," Diane confirmed, her tone brisk and entirely professional. "Paul is terrified enough to keep his mouth shut, and the security freezes on Bradley accounts are absolute. Even if he tries to use that forged power of attorney, the bank system will automatically reject the inquiry. You are completely insulated." "Thank you, Diane," I said, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for her ruthless efficiency. "But there is still one massive loose end we need to handle." I looked at Lucas, who was standing quietly beside my car, adjusting the heavy straps of his backpack. He had just witnessed the total financial execution of his own father, but his expression remained fiercely resolute. "Bradley and Stephanie still believe they successfully transferred the deed to the suburban house into their private shell company," I explained. "But Lucas verified the county clerk has not actually processed that fraudulent transfer yet. Legally speaking, my name is still the only name on that property deed." Diane smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. "You own it free and clear, Clara. You can do absolutely anything you want with that property until a judge says otherwise." I pulled my phone from my purse and unlocked the screen. I did not want to simply evict my son. If I served them a standard 30-day eviction notice, they would drag me through a lengthy, exhausting housing court battle upon their return. They would squat in the home I paid for, destroying the expensive fixtures and demanding a legal settlement to leave. I refused to grant them that opportunity. I navigated my contact list and found a name I had not called in over 5 years. Marcus Thorne was an aggressive commercial real estate developer. During my time running the garden centers, Marcus frequently purchased massive plots of land to build luxury condominiums. He was notorious in the local industry for buying prime real estate with liquid cash, moving with blinding speed, and completely gutting properties down to the foundational studs within hours of closing a deal. I pressed the call button and held the phone to my ear. Marcus answered on the third ring, his voice booming loudly over the sound of heavy construction equipment in the background. "Clara," he shouted, sounding genuinely surprised. "It has been years since you retired. Are you finally calling to sell me that prime corner lot near the highway?" "Not today, Marcus," I replied, pitching my voice to carry over his background noise. "But I do have an interesting proposition for you. I am looking to sell a 5-bedroom residential property in the wealthy northern suburb. It sits on a double lot with mature landscaping." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That is a highly competitive neighborhood, Clara. Properties out there easily go for $1.2 million on the open market. Why are you calling a commercial developer instead of a standard real estate agent?" "Because I am not interested in staging the house for public viewings," I explained smoothly. "I am not interested in waiting for a buyer to secure a traditional mortgage. I want an absolute quiet sale, and I want to close the deal entirely in cash. If you can finalize the purchase in exactly 48 hours, I will sell you the property for $900,000 flat." The construction noise in the background seemed to suddenly vanish as Marcus stepped away from his active site. I was a ruthless businessman, and I had just offered him a $300,000 discount on prime suburban real estate. $900,000 in cash. Marcus repeated, his voice dropping to a serious, calculated register. "That is a massive discount, Clara. What is the actual catch? Is the foundation sinking? Is the roof caving in?" "There is absolutely no catch regarding the physical structure," I assured him. "The house is in pristine condition. However, I need to explicitly stipulate that the property is being sold completely, as is including all remaining furniture and personal possessions currently locked inside. You will take full ownership of everything left on the premises. I want a complete clean break." I heard Marcus typing rapidly on a keyboard. I was likely pulling up the satellite view of the property address I provided. "I have a crew finishing a project 2 miles away from that location." Marcus finally said, his tone shifting into rapid negotiation mode. "We have been looking for a massive double lot in that specific neighborhood to tear down and replace with 2 modern luxury builds. If you are serious about the $900,000 price tag, I can have my legal team wire the funds into your trust account by tomorrow afternoon. We can sign the closing documents the following morning. I am completely serious, Marcus," I confirmed. "I will have my attorney Diane coordinate directly with your legal team today to expedite the paperwork. Consider it a done deal," Clara Marcus said. "My demolition crew will be ready to secure the perimeter and begin the interior gutting process the absolute second the ink dries on the contract." I hung up the phone and looked at Diane. She was already drafting an email on her mobile device to connect with Marcus' corporate lawyers. "The house is effectively sold," I told Lucas, walking toward the driver's side of my car. "We have 48 hours before Marcus takes total legal possession and begins tearing the kitchen apart." Lucas let out a breath he had been holding. "Grandma, that means all of their personal belongings, their expensive furniture, Stephanie designer clothes, everything is going to belong to a commercial demolition company by Friday morning." The discounted sale price did not trouble me. I understood exactly what I was giving up by refusing to list the house on the open market. $300,000 was a large amount of money, but speed had a value too. A conventional sale would invite inspection showings, financing delays, and weeks in which Bradley could return and use the forged paperwork to create chaos. Marcus was buying certainty. I was buying separation. The house had once been a gift of stability to my son, not a permanent reward for betrayal. Selling it quickly meant he could never again point to those walls as proof that my life belonged to him. Lucas seemed to understand the calculation. He asked whether I would regret watching a house worth more than $1 million disappear under a demolition crew. I told him the structure had never been the important part. A home mattered because of what people did inside it. In that house, Bradley had hidden forged documents in a safe and planned to have me declared incompetent. No granite countertop or landscaped pool could make those rooms feel like family again. Diane looked up from her phone and reminded us that Marcus could not legally take possession until the closing documents were executed. Until then, we needed to preserve the property, remove only personal necessities at the proper time, and make sure Bradley could not interfere with title. That warning shifted our attention back to the immediate danger. The house sale was moving. The money was protected. The remaining vulnerability was the forged legal authority. Bradley still believed he could weaponize from thousands of miles away. Diane stayed in the parking lot to send Marcus's attorney the ownership records and expedited sale instructions. The legal closing would happen on paper within 48 hours, but the decision was already irreversible. Lucas and I got into my car and pulled away from the bank. We were not going back to PAC yet. Diane wanted the county records protected first, because Bradley still possessed digital copies of the forged power of attorney and could try to force the deed transfer through before Marcus took legal possession. We would secure the courthouse record, then return for the final packing once the injunction was in place. Until that legal protection existed, touching more than necessary inside the house would only complicate the record. The next move had to be clean documented, and impossible for Bradley to twist into another story about a confused elderly mother acting irrationally. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt provided a temporary illusion of peace. I navigated my sedan through the winding suburban streets, leaving the massive house behind us. The afternoon sun filtered through the windshield, casting a warm golden glow over the dashboard. I took a slow, deep breath, allowing the tension in my shoulders to finally release. The commercial real estate developer was already preparing his demolition crews. My primary wealth portfolio was safely locked away inside an impenetrable blind trust. We had successfully executed the first phase of our defensive strategy. I glanced over at the passenger seat. Lucas sat quietly, clutching his heavy backpack resting against his knees. He looked exhausted but remarkably composed for a 19-year-old boy who had just helped dismantle his own father's financial world. The tranquil silence inside the vehicle shattered instantly. My cell phone erupted with a harsh, blaring ringtone from the center console. The sudden noise made both of us jump. I looked down at the bright digital display. A long, unusual string of digits flashed rapidly across the screen. It was a direct satellite call originating from international waters. Bradley had finally discovered the trap. I did not answer the phone immediately. I let it ring. I listened to the persistent electronic chime and allowed myself a brief moment to visualize the exact scenario currently unfolding on the other side of the globe. My son and his status-obsessed wife were standing in the grand lobby of a luxury cruise liner. They were surrounded by crystal chandeliers and wealthy vacationers, and they were experiencing the absolute terror of a declined credit card. The phone stopped ringing. 10 seconds later, it started blaring again. I guided the car into an empty parking space near a quiet public park. I shifted the gear into park and picked up the device. I pressed the green button and brought the phone to my ear. "Mom." Bradley screamed the word so loudly the audio distorted through the small speaker. His voice was frantic, breathless, and dripping with raw panic. "Mom, thank God you picked up the phone. There is a massive emergency. You need to fix this right now." I leaned back against the leather headrest. My voice was perfectly flat and entirely devoid of maternal warmth. "Is there a problem, Bradley? I thought you were busy enjoying an exclusive family vacation." "I am standing at the main purser desk on the ship," Bradley shouted, his tone bordering on outright hysteria. "None of our payment methods are working. Every single card I handed the concierge has been declined for suspected fraud. The premium drink packages are canceled. The private helicopter tour in Monaco is gone." I could hear the chaotic background noise of the busy cruise ship lobby. Over the ambient sound of ocean waves and polite chatter, I heard a sharp, familiar voice screeching in the distance. It was Stephanie. She was having a complete emotional meltdown. "Bradley, do something," Stephanie shrieked, her voice piercing through the satellite connection. "The concierge is demanding a valid form of payment for the luxury suite. They are threatening to downgrade our room. Tell your mother to fix her stupid banking glitch. My parents are standing right here watching this humiliation." I smiled a very thin, humorless smile. It brought me an immense amount of satisfaction to know her arrogant parents were witnessing the financial collapse of their entitled daughter. Stephanie had deliberately uninvited me from the trip to impress her own family. Now she was putting on a spectacular show for them. "Mom, are you listening to me?" Bradley demanded, breathing heavily into the receiver. "The cruise director just told me our return flights to the United States are completely voided. The airline canceled the reservations because the primary payment method was forcefully revoked. We are stranded here. You need to call Paul at the wealth management firm immediately." The sheer audacity of his demand was breathtaking. Even while stranded on a boat facing absolute financial ruin, his first instinct was to issue an arrogant command. He still fully believed he held the upper hand. He still thought the forged power of attorney sitting in his home office was a brilliant secret. "Call Paul right this second," Bradley ordered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "Tell him to lift the security hold on my checking accounts. Tell him to manually push an emergency wire transfer to the cruise line. I need $50,000 cleared in the next 10 minutes, or they are going to force us to disembark at the very next port." I remained completely silent for 5 long seconds. I let him listen to the steady, quiet breathing on my end of the line. I wanted the anticipation to stretch his nerves until they snapped. "I am afraid calling Paul will not solve your current dilemma, Bradley," I said, speaking slowly and enunciating every single syllable. "What are you talking about?" Bradley stammered. "Just pick up the other line and call the bank. Paul Evans no longer manages my financial portfolio," I explained, keeping my tone casually conversational. "In fact, Paul no longer possesses a job. I visited his office earlier this morning alongside my corporate litigation attorney. We had a very enlightening discussion about wire fraud, elder abuse, and the severe legal penalties for unauthorized estate manipulation." The line went completely dead silent. The background noise of the cruise ship lobby seemed to vanish entirely. "What did you just say?" Bradley whispered. His voice lost all its arrogant, demanding volume. It was replaced by the hollow, trembling sound of a man realizing he had just stepped off a cliff. I triggered a complete asset freeze. I continued my words, slicing through the satellite connection like a sharp blade. "Every single penny of my accumulated wealth is now legally locked inside a secure blind trust. You have absolutely no access to my commercial real estate. You have no access to my investment portfolios. And that fraudulent $800,000 commercial line of credit you secured against my nursery properties has been permanently terminated." "No," Bradley gasped. The sound was ragged and desperate. "Mom, you do not understand. You cannot do this. We have nothing left." "You have exactly what you earned," I replied. "You decided to treat me like an obsolete piece of machinery. You forged my signature on a legal document declaring me mentally unfit. You plotted to steal my life savings and lock me inside a psychiatric ward while you drank expensive champagne on a boat I paid for. Stephanie's voice suddenly returned to the background, louder and more frantic than before. What is happening, Bradley? What did the old bat say? Tell her to wire the money right now. I hope Stephanie's family brought their own premium credit cards, I said, ignoring her distant screeching. You are going to need a substantial amount of cash to purchase last-minute international plane tickets. Enjoy the rest of your vacation, Bradley. Mom, please wait, Bradley begged, openly weeping into the phone. Please do not hang up. I am your son. You are just a man who tried to steal my life, I answered. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I sat in the quiet car for several minutes, staring out at the green trees in the park. My chest felt incredibly tight. A small part of my heart grieved for the son I had officially lost today. But the larger, stronger part of my spirit felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The heavy chains of obligation and unappreciated generosity were finally broken. Lucas reached across the center console and gently placed his hand over mine. You did the right thing, Grandma. He made his choice a long time ago. I know, Lucas, I said, taking a deep, steadying breath. Now we need to prepare for his counterattack. A desperate man is a highly dangerous man. I shifted the car into drive and steered us back onto the main road. We drove to a small, quiet coffee shop located in the commercial district. We needed a secure public internet connection and a place to sit down and strategize. We purchased 2 dark roast coffees and claimed a secluded booth in the very back corner of the building. Lucas unzipped his heavy backpack and pulled out his sophisticated laptop. He placed the portable machine on the wooden table and quickly connected the external hard drive containing all the digital evidence we had cloned from Bradley's office. My son was greedy and arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. He still possessed digital copies of the forged power of attorney and the fraudulent medical evaluation. I knew his physical bank accounts were frozen, but he would not simply accept defeat and enjoy the remainder of his cruise. He would desperately search for a legal loophole to force the system to release his stolen funds. I need to monitor his active digital footprint. Lucas muttered, his eyes scanning the rapid lines of code scrolling across his dark screen. I set up a silent tracking protocol on his primary email and his cloud storage accounts when we were inside the house. If he attempts to access any official portals or send secure documents, I will receive an immediate notification. We sat in the coffee shop for nearly an hour. The afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the quiet street outside the window. I slowly drank my dark coffee, processing the monumental shifts that had occurred over the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning, I was packing a silk dress for a family trip. Today, I was actively hunting my own child across the global digital landscape. Suddenly, a sharp chiming sound erupted from Lucas' computer speakers. A bright red notification box flashed violently in the center of the dark monitor. Lucas leaned forward, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced lightning speed. His brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Hi is moving," Lucas announced, his voice tight with rising tension. "Dad is using the cruise ship premium satellite internet to access a secure external server." "What is he trying to do?" I asked, setting my coffee cup down on the wooden table. Lucas typed another rapid sequence of commands tracing the digital routing path. He is bypassing the local bank servers entirely. He knows Paul is compromised, so he is going straight to the top of the legal food chain. Lucas pulled up a mirrored view of Bradley's active browser window. My stomach performed a sudden sickening drop as I read the official seal displayed across the top of the web page. "He is logging into the State County Clerk electronic filing system," Lucas explained, tracing the destination URL. "He is using a priority legal portal to manually submit the forged power of attorney directly to the state registry." "Why would he do that from international waters?" I asked, trying to understand his frantic strategy. "Because if the state officially registers the power of attorney and logs the fraudulent medical evaluation into the permanent court record, it becomes an absolute legally binding mandate." Lucas set his eyes wide with alarm. "If the state approves that document, the bank will be legally forced to ignore your asset freeze. The state mandate will override your personal instructions. I is trying to legally strip your rights before the police can intervene." I stared at the screen, watching a small progress bar slowly ticking across the bottom of the window. Bradley was uploading the massive PDF file containing the forged signatures and the fake dementia diagnosis. I was using the desperate final weapon in his arsenal. If that document cleared the automated county clerk system, he would instantly regain total control of my entire multi-million-dollar estate. He could drain the blind trust. He could cancel the sale of the house. He could send a medical transport team to my location and have me forcefully committed to a locked ward. The digital progress bar reached 50%. "We cannot let that file process," I stated, my voice completely devoid of panic. "Lucas, can you stop the upload from your computer? Can you block his connection?" Lucas shook his head rapidly, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "The cruise ship uses an encrypted satellite relay. I cannot intercept the signal without shutting down the entire maritime network. The county clerk system is automated. It processes priority legal documents instantly upon receipt." The progress bar hit 75%. The tension in the small coffee shop booth spiked to an unbearable level. We had completely outsmarted him at the bank. We had successfully sold his house out from under him. But the sheer destructive power of a registered legal document threatened to crush our entire victory into dust. I grabbed my cell phone from the table and immediately searched for Diane's direct contact number. A digital firewall was not going to save us today. We needed a brutal physical intervention to stop the legal machinery from destroying my life. The battle was escalating far beyond frozen credit cards and canceled vacations. I pressed the call button and listened to the line ring. The progress bar on Lucas' screen crept closer to 90%. We were officially running out of time. The digital progress bar on the computer screen crawled forward with agonizing slowness. It hit 92%, and the bright green color felt like a glaring warning light inside the dim coffee shop. Bradley was frantically pushing the forged legal documents through the satellite internet connection, trying to cement his absolute control over my entire life before anyone could stop him. I held my cell phone to my ear and listened to the sharp, repetitive tone of the ringing line. Diane answered on the second ring. She did not offer a polite greeting or ask how my day was going. Diane was a corporate litigator who treated every phone call like a tactical military briefing. I explained the escalating situation in 3 rapid, precise sentences. I told her my son was currently uploading a fraudulent power of attorney to the county clerk automated registry from an international cruise ship. "Get to the municipal courthouse downtown immediately," Diane instructed, her voice completely devoid of panic. "Do not bother driving the speed limit, Clara. I am drafting an emergency judicial injunction right now. I will print the affidavits and meet you on the front steps of the limestone building in exactly 20 minutes. The line disconnected. I grabbed my purse and signaled to Lucas. He slammed his laptop shut and shoved the heavy machine into his backpack. We rushed out of the quiet coffee shop and sprinted toward my sedan parked on the street. I pushed the car engine hard, weaving through the late afternoon city traffic with an aggressive determination I had not felt in decades. For 40 years I had managed fragile seedlings and cultivated delicate imported fruit trees. My entire career was built on extreme patience and gentle nurturing. I knew how to wait for the changing seasons. But today, there was absolutely no room for patience. I was treating my vehicle like a blunt instrument, forcing my way past slow-moving delivery trucks and running through yellow traffic lights. Lucas sat perfectly rigid in the passenger seat, holding onto the interior safety handle. He kept his eyes locked on the digital clock glowing on the dashboard. "The county clerk system is automated," Lucas explained, his voice tight with lingering anxiety. "If the upload finishes and the digital signature verification scans the notary stamp, the document drops directly into the active public record. The bank compliance software automatically scrapes that public registry every hour. Once the bank registers the mandate, they will lift the security freeze on his checking accounts and push the massive wire transfer through. We will not let that happen," I stated firmly, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. We arrived at the downtown Judicial Center in 19 minutes. The massive limestone building loomed over the city square, looking like an ancient, impenetrable fortress of bureaucracy. I abandoned my car in a restricted commercial loading zone, not caring if it received a parking citation or a heavy tow boot. We rushed up the wide concrete steps toward the towering glass doors. Diane was already standing near the security checkpoint. She wore a tailored charcoal wool suit and held a thick manila folder tightly against her chest. She possessed the sharp, calculating energy of a predator who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She handed me a heavy brass pen and pointed to 3 separate signature lines on the freshly printed legal documents. "Sign these immediately," Diane ordered. These are sworn affidavits confirming extreme identity theft and declaring penalty of perjury that you did not authorize any medical evaluations or financial transfers. I signed my name with sharp, vicious strokes tearing into the thick paper. We bypassed the slow-moving lines of citizens waiting for routine permits and marched directly toward the Primary Records Administration desk. The municipal office was a chaotic maze of ringing telephones, heavily loaded filing carts, and bright fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Diane ignored the standard intake queue and walked straight up to the elevated desk of the senior department supervisor. The woman sitting behind the tall counter wore thick reading glasses and looked completely exhausted by the afternoon rush. She held up a hand to stop us. "You need to take a numbered ticket and wait in the designated seating area," the supervisor said, gesturing tiredly toward a crowded row of plastic chairs. Diane slapped the thick legal folder down onto the polished counter with a resounding crack that made several people in the room turn and stare. "My name is Diane, and I am representing Clara standing right beside me," she announced, projecting her voice with absolute authority. "We are actively intercepting a massive multi-million-dollar financial fraud currently being perpetrated across international lines. I am serving you with a direct emergency judicial injunction to freeze any and all documents filed under my client legal name within the last 48 hours. The supervisor blinked, her exhaustion vanishing instantly as she recognized the sheer gravity of the legal threat. She pulled her keyboard closer and adjusted her glasses. "What is the exact spelling of the primary subject name?" she asked, her fingers hovering over the keys. I provided my full legal name and my date of birth. The supervisor typed the information into the local county registry database. The heavy silence in the crowded room felt suffocating. I could hear my own heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I thought about my son sitting on his luxury cruise ship, aggressively clicking his mouse and waiting for the ultimate confirmation of his victory. "There is a durable power of attorney currently sitting in the digital receiving queue," the supervisor confirmed, her eyes scanning the bright monitor. "It was uploaded electronically approximately 4 minutes ago. The automated verification software is currently scanning the attached notary seal. It is scheduled to officially post to the public ledger in less than 60 seconds. "Halt the processing immediately," Diane commanded, leaning over the counter. "I am formally notifying you that the signature is completely forged and the notary seal was obtained through criminal deception. If your automated system approves that document, this county will be listed as an active accessory in a federal wire fraud investigation." The supervisor did not hesitate. She rapidly clicked her mouse and hammered a sequence of override commands into her keyboard. The system chimed with a harsh, rejecting tone. "I have manually suspended the document processing," she stated, pulling a physical confirmation slip from a nearby printer. "The file has been quarantined in our fraud division server. It will not post to the public registry, and it will not be visible to any external banking compliance software. The transfer is completely dead." I let out a long, trembling breath, leaning heavily against the tall counter. The digital guillotine had been stopped mere inches from my neck. The massive fortune I had spent my entire adult life building was officially safe. Bradley had fired his final desperate weapon, and the ammunition had turned into useless dust. But Diane was not finished. She turned to me and snapped her briefcase shut. "Blocking the fraudulent document protects your money," Diane said, her eyes narrowing with intense focus. "But it does not punish the perpetrator. We are going to walk down the hall to the municipal police precinct right now. We are going to ensure your son never sleeps peacefully in his own bed ever again." We left the bustling records department and walked down a long, polished marble corridor toward the judicial law enforcement wing. The atmosphere shifted dramatically from bureaucratic noise to grim, sterile silence. We were ushered into a small, private interview room smelling faintly of stale coffee and industrial floor cleaner. Detective Miller sat across a dented metal table from us. He was a seasoned financial crimes investigator with graying hair and a deeply lined face. He listened quietly as I laid out the entire miserable narrative of my son's betrayal. I explained the canceled luxury vacation, the hidden wall safe, the forged property deeds, and the terrifying fake medical evaluation intended to lock me inside a psychiatric ward. Lucas unzipped his backpack and placed the external hard drive on the metal table, sliding it carefully toward the detective. "This drive contains the complete digital footprint," Lucas explained, his voice steady, despite the immense emotional weight of handing over his own father to the police. "It holds the internal email chains between my dad and the corrupt wealth manager. It also contains the exact IP routing logs, proving my dad just attempted to file the forged documents while actively sailing in international waters. Detective Miller opened his laptop and connected the drive. He spent 15 minutes silently scrolling through the dense files, verifying the undeniable trail of calculated malice. When he finally looked up from the screen, his expression was entirely devoid of sympathy for my son. If your son had simply stolen a few $1,000s from your purse, this would be a difficult domestic dispute, Detective Miller stated, leaning back in his chair. But he did not just steal cash. He engaged in a highly coordinated conspiracy to commit aggravated identity theft. He forged official state documents, and by attempting to execute a multi-million-dollar financial takeover using a maritime satellite connection, he crossed international borders. What exactly does that mean for him? I asked, keeping my hands folded tightly in my lap. It means this is no longer a simple local jurisdiction issue, Detective Miller replied grimly. This is a severe federal crime. He attempted to use interstate telecommunications to commit massive wire fraud. I am going to draft a comprehensive arrest warrant and push it through the federal database tonight. The reality of the situation washed over me like a wave of freezing water. I was actively sealing the fate of the boy I had raised. I thought about all the scraped knees I had bandaged and all the school lunches I had packed. I thought about the endless sacrifices I had made to ensure he never went hungry or felt unloved. And then I thought about the fake medical paper he had signed, attempting to strip away my basic human dignity and lock me away to die forgotten in a clinical room. My maternal guilt evaporated completely. Justice demands a heavy price, and he had eagerly volunteered to pay it. Your son is currently stranded on a ship with entirely frozen financial accounts. The detective continued typing rapidly into his secure reporting software. He has absolutely no access to his credit lines and no way to purchase a return flight home. But even if he manages to beg or borrow enough money from his wife's wealthy family to secure a plane ticket, his nightmare is just beginning. I looked at Diane, who offered a slow, satisfied nod. The absolute moment he hands his passport to the border control agent at the airport, customs checkpoint, the federal database will flag his identity, Detective Miller explained. He will be immediately detained by federal marshals before his feet ever touch open American soil. He is officially a wanted fugitive. We finished signing the formal police reports and witness statements. We walked out of the heavy glass doors of the municipal building and stepped into the warm, late afternoon sunlight. The city noise washed over us, a chaotic blend of honking cars and rushing pedestrians. It felt entirely separate from the dark, miserable reality of the betrayal I had just survived. The legal war was completely won. The financial assets were secured. The criminal warrants were actively processing through the highest levels of the justice system. I had successfully defended my lifework from total annihilation. But as I stood on the wide concrete steps, looking out over the busy street, I realized there was still one final agonizing task remaining. It was not a legal maneuver or a financial block. It was a deeply personal, physical execution of the past. I turned to Lucas, who was squinting against the bright sunlight. He looked incredibly young in that moment, burdened by the destruction of his own family unit. "Are you all right, Lucas?" I asked gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. He took a slow, shaky breath and nodded. "I am fine, Grandma. I just cannot believe he actually tried to do this to you. I cannot believe he hated us that much." "He did not hate us," I corrected softly. "He simply loved himself more. Greed is a very loud voice, and he chose to listen to it." I pulled my car keys from my purse. The commercial real estate developer was going to take total legal possession of Bradley's suburban house in less than 48 hours. Marcus' demolition crew would arrive with heavy sledgehammers and massive dumpsters ready to tear the beautiful custom property down to the bare dirt. "We need to go back to the house," I told Lucas, my voice softening with a heavy, inevitable sadness. "We need to pack up his childhood memories before the walls come crashing down." We walked to the car in silence, preparing to enter the empty, echoing house one last time. I had protected my future, but now I had to physically bury the ghosts of my past. The heavy adrenaline that had fueled my actions over the past 2 days finally began to evaporate. It was replaced by a profound, heavy stillness as Lucas and I unlocked the front door of the sprawling suburban property for the final time. We stepped into the grand foyer. The air inside the house felt thick and suffocating. It smelled faintly of Stephanie's expensive floral perfume and the lingering scent of floor polish. The morning sunlight poured through the massive custom windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. We had successfully secured my financial empire and effectively blocked the fraudulent legal filings at the downtown courthouse. The commercial real estate developer was officially taking possession of this property on Monday morning. I had exactly 48 hours to completely strip this massive house down to the bare walls. I walked slowly into the formal living room. My footsteps echoed sharply against the imported hardwood floors. I stood in the center of the space and looked at the elaborate gallery walls Stephanie had meticulously curated. Dozens of silver and glass frames hung in perfect symmetrical alignment. They showcased smiling professional portraits of Bradley and his wife standing on pristine beaches or attending exclusive country club galas. I approached the wall and carefully took down a smaller wooden frame resting on a nearby side table. It was an older photograph. The colors were slightly faded. It showed Bradley when he was 12 years old, wearing a dirt-stained baseball uniform and holding a cheap plastic trophy. His front tooth was missing, and his smile was incredibly genuine. He was not looking at the camera. He was looking slightly off to the side, directly at me with an expression of absolute pure trust. My chest tightened with a sudden agonizing pressure. I traced the edge of the wooden frame with my thumb. This was the most agonizing part of the entire war. The financial retaliation was strictly business. The legal blocking was pure survival strategy. But standing in this quiet house, dismantling the physical evidence of my son's life, felt like attending a funeral for someone who was still breathing. I was not just packing up furniture and clothing. I was systematically erasing my child from my history. Lucas walked quietly into the room holding a large cardboard box and a roll of heavy packing tape. He set the box down on the floor and looked at the photograph in my hands. "He was a really good kid back then," Grandma Lucas said, his voice incredibly soft. "I remember finding that picture in the attic a few years ago. I asked him about that baseball game, and he talked about it for an hour. He said you drove him to every single practice and brought sliced oranges for the whole team." I nodded, unable to speak for a long moment. I remembered that specific summer perfectly. I was working 60-hour weeks trying to keep my first nursery business afloat, but I never missed a single game. I sacrificed my own sleep and my own comfort to ensure he felt supported. "The boy in this photograph died a long time ago, Lucas," I said, my voice finally steadying. "I was replaced by a man who looked at my lifetime of sacrifice and saw nothing but a bank account waiting to be drained. I cannot save the boy in the picture. I can only protect myself from the man he became." I dropped the wooden frame into the bottom of the cardboard box. The glass cracked slightly against the cardboard, but I did not reach down to fix it. The mourning period was officially over. It was time to clear the battlefield. We spent the next 4 hours moving methodically through the upper level of the house. The emotional weight of the task pressed down on my shoulders, but I refused to stop. I packed away the few remaining artifacts of his youth. I boxed up his old high school diploma and a handful of birthday cards he had given me years ago. Every item went into a single small container. I sealed it tightly with tape and wrote the word "past" across the top in thick black marker. Then the heavy diesel engine of a commercial moving truck rumbled in the driveway outside. I walked out onto the front porch and greeted the foreman of the moving crew I had hired earlier that morning. I handed him a thick envelope of cash and provided extremely specific instructions. "You are going to clear out the master bedroom, the master bathroom, and the custom walk-in closets," I instructed the burly foreman. "You will pack every single piece of adult clothing, every pair of shoes, every bottle of cologne, and every piece of personal jewelry. You will pack the expensive electronics and the luxury luggage sets. You will load all of it into your truck. You are not required to be gentle." The foreman counted the cash and offered a sharp, confirming nod. His crew of 6 men moved into the house with ruthless mechanical efficiency. I stood in the upstairs hallway with Lucas and watched the systematic dismantling of Stephanie Artificial Kingdom. The movers did not bother with protective tissue paper or careful folding techniques. They grabbed handfuls of imported silk dresses and expensive designer handbags, tossing them roughly into large industrial cardboard bins. They swept entire rows of luxury cosmetics and expensive imported perfumes off the bathroom vanity and dumped them into heavy black trash bags. Stephanie had spent years accumulating these status symbols, using the money she squeezed out of my son and the funds they secretly siphoned from my business accounts. She believed these expensive objects made her superior to the people around her. Now her entire curated identity was being shoved into cheap cardboard boxes by men wearing dusty work boots. Bradley tailored suits and expensive Italian leather shoes suffered the exact same fate. The movers cleared his entire wardrobe in less than 20 minutes. They dismantled his high-end computer gaming setup and tossed his expensive golf clubs into a plastic crate. They stripped the master bedroom of every single personal item, leaving nothing behind but the bare mattress and the empty, echoing walls. It was a brutal, clinical purge. We directed the moving crew to leave the heavy furniture behind. The custom dining table, the massive velvet sofas, and the expensive bedroom sets would all legally transfer to the commercial developer when he took possession of the property. Marcus and his demolition crew would smash the luxury furniture into splinters and toss it all into a commercial dumpster. I absolutely refused to pay a single penny to transport their oversized couches. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the large moving truck was fully loaded with 50 heavy boxes of personal belongings. I signed the final work order and directed the foreman to follow my sedan to a specific address on the industrial outer edge of the city. The storage facility I selected was located in a remarkably bleak and rundown neighborhood. It was surrounded by auto repair shops and abandoned warehouses. There was no climate control. There was no dedicated security guard. It was simply a massive lot of rusted orange metal doors baking under the intense afternoon sun. I paid the board facility manager in cash for exactly 1 month of rental time on a large ground-level unit. He handed me a simple silver padlock and a single brass key. Lucas and I stood in the sweltering heat and watched the moving crew unload the heavy boxes. They stacked Stephanie crushed designer dresses and Bradley wrinkled expensive suits directly onto the dusty concrete floor of the storage unit. The interior of the metal box was easily over 100 degrees. The intense heat would undoubtedly ruin the expensive cosmetics and warp the fine leather shoes within a matter of days. I felt absolutely no guilt regarding that fact. When the final box was shoved into the dark, cramped space, I pulled the heavy corrugated metal door down. The rusty track screamed in protest. I snapped the silver padlock into place and tugged on it hard to ensure it was secure. I dropped the single brass key into the bottom of my leather purse. Their entire fabricated, luxurious life was now locked inside a baking metal oven in the worst part of town. We dismissed the moving crew and drove back to the suburban property one last time. I needed to perform a final inspection before abandoning the location entirely. We walked through the front door, and the sheer emptiness of the house was staggering. Without the personal belongings and the daily clutter, the sprawling 5-bedroom home felt like a massive hollow cavern. Every footstep echoed sharply against the walls. The custom kitchen looked sterile and abandoned. The grand living room felt incredibly cold. I walked through the empty spaces, feeling a strange sense of profound closure. This house was no longer a home. It was just a structure made of wood and glass. The toxic infection that had lived inside these walls was completely cleansed. Lucas sat down on the bottom step of the sweeping staircase and opened his laptop, resting the machine on his knees. He connected to his mobile hotspot and pulled up the active flight tracking software. The tension in his shoulders instantly returned, and his jaw tightened as he read the data on the glowing screen. "They are in the air," Grandma Lucas announced, his voice echoing slightly in the vast, empty foyer. I turned away from the bare kitchen and walked over to where my grandson was sitting. I looked down at the bright screen. A small digital airplane icon was slowly inching its way across a map of the Atlantic Ocean. "Tell me everything," I instructed, keeping my tone strictly professional. Lucas tapped the keyboard, pulling up the detailed passenger manifest he had managed to monitor through his tracking protocols. Their cruise ship docked in Spain 3 hours ago. The captain forcefully disembarked them immediately because their payment methods were entirely invalid. They had to call Stephanie's parents in a complete panic to beg for emergency travel funds. I smiled a very tight, grim smile. Stephanie's parents were wealthy, but they were also incredibly stingy and judgmental. The phone call begging for money must have been an absolute nightmare for her fragile ego. Her parents refused to pay for luxury accommodations. Lucas continued reading the flight details. They bought them the absolute cheapest basic economy tickets available on a discount international airline. Dad and Stephanie are currently sitting in cramped middle seats near the back of the plane. They have a 12-hour flight and a 4-hour layover in a miserable budget terminal. They are going to be completely exhausted and incredibly furious when they land. I noted, analyzing the tactical timeline. What is their ultimate destination? Lucas closed the flight tracker and opened a local rideshare monitoring application. They booked a large transport vehicle to pick them up directly from the airport terminal tomorrow morning. The destination address for the ride is exactly where we are standing right now. They are coming straight back to this house. I nodded, slowly processing the final stages of the imminent confrontation. Bradley and Stephanie were currently trapped in a metal tube flying thousands of miles back to a life that no longer existed. They were sitting in cheap seats, completely humiliated by their forced exit from the luxury cruise. But in their arrogant minds, they still believed they held the ultimate winning hand. They believed the forged power of attorney and the fraudulent property deeds had successfully processed through the county clerk system while they were stuck at sea. They believed that when they arrived at this suburban address tomorrow morning, they would be walking into a house they fully and legally owned. They fully expected to find me sitting in the living room crying and completely defeated. They expected to use those forged medical documents to have me forcefully removed from the premises and locked inside a psychiatric facility. They were flying home expecting to claim their stolen kingdom. "Close your laptop." "Lucas," I said, reaching out and resting my hand on his shoulder. "We are completely finished here today. We have stripped the castle bare." Lucas packed his computer away and stood up. He looked around the vast, empty foyer one final time. "It is really over," he whispered. "The preparation is over," I corrected, walking toward the heavy mahogany front door. "Tomorrow morning, the reality sets in." We walked out onto the front porch, and I pulled the door firmly shut behind us. I did not bother to lock the deadbolt. The commercial demolition crews would be arriving at dawn to begin tearing the expensive property down to the bare dirt. The doors did not matter anymore. I drove us away from the quiet suburban street as the evening sun began to dip below the horizon. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. Tomorrow my son would land in his home city, carrying forged papers and a heart full of unearned greed. He would step out of a car expecting to evict his own mother. Instead, he would step directly into a brutal, devastating trap constructed from his own arrogance. The digital firewall had held strong. The financial assets were secured. The house was sold. The trap was perfectly set. All we had to do now was wait for the morning light and watch the greedy heirs walk blindly into their own total destruction. The heavy tires of the budget rideshare van thumped rhythmically against the pristine asphalt of the wealthy suburban neighborhood. Inside the cramped vehicle, the air was thick with the sour smell of stale coffee, exhausted sweat, and simmering volcanic rage. Stephanie sat rigid in the middle row of the van. Her usually flawless hair was matted and chaotic after enduring a miserable 12-hour flight in a basic economy middle seat. Her designer silk blouse was deeply wrinkled and stained with a drop of cheap airline tomato juice. She clutched her expensive leather handbag against her chest, like a physical shield glaring out the window with absolute venom. Behind her, in the cramped third row, sat her parents, Warren and Patricia. They were wealthy, status-obsessed people who prided themselves on their polished public image. They had spent the entire agonizing journey across the Atlantic Ocean complaining bitterly about the sheer humiliation of their forced exit from the luxury cruise ship. They had been forced to liquidate a portion of their own private stock portfolio just to purchase 4 last-minute international plane tickets on a discount carrier. They were furious at their daughter, and they were even more furious at the man she had married. Bradley sat in the front passenger seat staring blankly at the digital clock on the dashboard. His custom-tailored suit jacket was crumpled in his lap. His eyes were red and severely bloodshot from a total lack of sleep. His jaw was clenched so tightly, a muscle twitched visibly in his cheek. He had spent the entire transatlantic flight trying to access the county clerk legal portal using the terrible airplane wireless connection. I was absolutely desperate to verify that his forged power of attorney had successfully processed through the automated state registry. "I am not even going to let her pack a travel bag," Stephanie hissed, her voice breaking the heavy silence inside the van. "The absolute minute we walk through that front door, I am calling the private medical transport company. I am not waiting for a doctor to arrive. She is going straight to the lockdown ward today." Bradley did not turn around to look at his wife. He just nodded slowly, keeping his bloodshot eyes locked straight ahead. "She crossed a massive line, Stephanie. Canceling our credit cards and ruining the family vacation was completely psychotic. The medical transport team will have no problem taking her away when we show them the paperwork." Patricia leaned forward from the back row, her voice dripping with sharp maternal condescension. You better make sure those legal documents actually work, Bradley. Your father and I just spent $14,000 to fly you home from Spain like common backpackers. We were escorted off that luxury ship in front of our own country club friends. It was the most embarrassing moment of my entire life. I expect to be fully reimbursed the second you take control of your mother banking accounts. You will get every single penny back, Warren Bradley promised, rubbing his throbbing temples. The liquid assets were scheduled to transfer into our holding company while we were in the air. The estate is secure. We just need to walk inside the house, print the final confirmation pages, and call the medical authorities. By dinner time tonight, my mother will be heavily sedated in a secure state facility, and our financial portfolio will be effectively doubled. The rideshare driver turned the final corner onto their exclusive quiet street. The towering oak trees cast cool, pleasant shadows across the perfectly manicured green lawns. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had when they rushed out to the airport 3 days ago. The illusion of their perfect, wealthy life remained totally intact from the street view. But as the van approached their specific property, the confident, arrogant atmosphere inside the vehicle instantly evaporated. Bradley sat up straight in the passenger seat, his heart skipping a sudden violent beat. There were 4 massive white commercial dumpsters parked directly in the center of their wide paver driveway. 2 heavy-duty construction trucks were idling on the front lawn, crushing Stephanie prize-winning hydrangea bushes into the dirt. A thick cloud of white drywall dust was billowing out of the open front windows of the house. "What in the world is happening?" Stephanie demanded, pressing her face against the glass window. "Did she hire a roofing company without telling us? Tell the driver to pull up to the curb immediately." The van rolled to a stop. Bradley threw the passenger door open before the vehicle even shifted into park. He marched up the sidewalk, his expensive leather shoes crunching loudly against a thick layer of scattered gravel and broken glass. The heavy custom mahogany front door was completely gone. It had been removed from its hinges and tossed casually into one of the massive white dumpsters. Bradley stepped into the grand foyer and stopped so abruptly that Stephanie crashed directly into his back. The house was completely, utterly destroyed. The imported Italian tile that once covered the entryway floor had been completely pulverized. The sweeping oak staircase was stripped bare, missing its elegant wooden banisters and its plush carpet runner. The massive crystal chandelier that used to hang proudly from the vaulted ceiling was missing, leaving only a tangle of raw-colored electrical wires dangling from a jagged hole in the drywall. The deafening roar of power saws and heavy sledgehammers echoed aggressively through the hollow structure. A crew of 12 men wearing yellow hard hats and thick white dust masks were systematically tearing the remaining walls down to the bare wooden studs. "Where is my furniture?" Stephanie shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly over the grinding mechanical noise. "Where are the leather sofas? Where are my imported rugs?" She pushed past her frozen husband and ran toward the back of the house, heading straight for the massive custom kitchen. Bradley stumbled after her, his mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the physical devastation. The kitchen did not exist anymore. The luxury marble countertops, the expensive stainless steel appliances, the custom-painted cabinets, they were all entirely gone. The room was nothing more than a hollow cavern of splintered wooden subfloor and exposed copper plumbing pipes sticking out of the ground like broken bones. The large bay windows looking out over the custom swimming pool had been smashed out and covered with cheap plastic tarps. "My clothes!" Stephanie suddenly gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute horror. She spun around, looking up toward the second floor. The master bedroom, my designer bags, my entire wardrobe. She scrambled toward the stripped staircase, ignoring the dangerous exposed nails and the thick layer of white plaster dust coating her expensive shoes. "Hey, you cannot go up there!" A loud booming voice cut through the dust and the mechanical noise. A large, broad-shouldered man, wearing a bright orange reflective vest and a white safety helmet, stepped out from what used to be the formal dining room. He pulled his protective dust mask down around his neck and glared at the intruders. "This is an active commercial demolition zone," the man barked, pointing a thick, calloused finger at Bradley. "You people cannot just wander in here off the street without proper safety gear. You need to turn around and walk back out to the sidewalk right now." Bradley squared his shoulders, trying desperately to summon his commanding corporate management persona. He puffed out his chest and marched directly toward the construction worker. "I am not wandering in off the street, you absolute idiot," Bradley screamed, his face flushing a dark, angry red. "I own this property. This is my private residential home. Who are you, and who the hell authorized you to destroy my kitchen?" The large man crossed his muscular arms over his chest. He looked at Bradley's wrinkled suit and red bloodshot eyes with total, unbothered amusement. "My name is Tom," the man replied, his voice dripping with blue-collar indifference. "I am the site foreman for Thorne Commercial Development, and you definitely do not own this property, buddy. My boss bought this double lot in a pure cash deal yesterday afternoon. We are tearing this outdated structure down to the foundation to build 2 modern luxury properties. Now get out of my active work zone before I call the local police and have you cited for trespassing." "You are completely insane," Bradley shouted, spit flying from his lips. He reached frantically into his crumpled suit jacket and pulled out his expensive smartphone. "I have the legal property deed right here on my phone. My wife and I are the sole managing directors of the holding company that owns this specific parcel of land. I filed the legal transfer paperwork myself." Tom let out a short, harsh laugh. He did not even bother to look at the bright screen of the mobile device Bradley was shoving aggressively into his face. "I do not care what kind of fake internet document you have on your little phone, buddy," Tom said, taking a heavy, intimidating step forward. "I have a legally binding commercial demolition permit stamped and signed by the city building inspector this morning. The previous owner sold the land completely as is and gave us full permission to gut the interior immediately." "The previous owner," Stephanie shrieked, stepping up beside her husband. She looked completely unhinged. Her face was streaked with sweat and drywall dust. "What do you mean, as is? Where are my personal belongings? Where are my silk dresses and my expensive jewelry? You cannot just throw my things away." Tom looked at the hysterical woman and shrugged his heavy shoulders. "I did not throw anything away," Lady Tom stated bluntly. "When my crew arrived here at dawn this morning, the house was already completely empty. There was no furniture. There were no clothes. The only thing left inside this building was the copper wire inside the walls and the appliances in the kitchen. If you lost a bunch of fancy dresses, you need to take that up with whoever sold the property. Now I am not going to ask you nicely again. Get off my construction site." Bradley's hands were shaking violently as he stared at the glowing screen of his smartphone. He ignored the foreman completely and opened his mobile internet browser. He navigated frantically to the county clerk official public registry portal. He typed in his own name and hit the search button, expecting to see his newly formed shell company listed as the proud owner of the million-dollar estate. The search results loaded on the bright screen. The property ownership history showed a massive, glaring red flag. The system displayed a formal judicial injunction effectively blocking all deed transfers initiated under his name. Beside the injunction was a fresh, bold entry showing a commercial cash sale completely finalized and closed by a woman named Clara. "No," Bradley gasped, the phone slipping slightly in his sweaty palm. "No, this is totally impossible. I uploaded the power of attorney. The automated system approved the medical evaluation. I bypassed her security freeze. I filed the legal mandate." He switched applications, pulling up his secure banking portal. He typed in his passwords with frantic, uncoordinated thumbs. He needed to see the offshore holding account. He needed to see the $4 million in liquid cash he believed he had successfully stolen. He needed proof that he had not just lost his entire house. The banking application loaded a stark white screen with bold black text. "Account access permanently suspended. Contact Federal Fraud Division immediately." Bradley felt his knees buckle. He staggered backward, hitting his shoulder against an exposed wooden wall stud. The heavy, vibrating power saws running upstairs seemed to echo directly inside his skull. His massive, sophisticated financial trap had not just failed to spring. It had violently reversed direction and crushed him completely. Stephanie grabbed his arm, shaking him aggressively. "Bradley, what is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice rising to a frantic, panicked pitch. "Show this construction worker the legal papers. Call the local police department right now and report a massive robbery. Your mother has completely lost her mind. We need to have her arrested and locked up today." Warren and Patricia stepped carefully into the dusty, ruined foyer behind them. They looked at the exposed electrical wires and the pulverized floor tiles with absolute upper-class revulsion. "Bradley, what in the world is happening here?" Warren demanded, his deep voice echoing with wealthy entitlement. "We just spent a fortune flying you back from Europe to take control of a multi-million-dollar estate. Why is your primary residence currently a commercial demolition site? Explain this catastrophic failure immediately." Bradley could not speak. He could only stare at the digital screen in his hand, his mind completely short-circuiting under the crushing weight of total reality. His mother was not a confused, vulnerable old woman. His mother was a tactical apex predator who had just systematically destroyed his entire existence while he was trapped in an airplane over the ocean. "Listen to me very carefully, you arrogant trespassers." Tom the foreman shouted, his patience officially exhausted. He reached to his utility belt and pulled out a heavy black two-way radio. "I am giving you exactly 10 seconds to turn around and walk back out to the public sidewalk. If you are still standing on my dirt when I finish counting, I am calling the patrol officers sitting 3 blocks down the street." "I am not leaving my house," Bradley finally roared, finding a sudden burst of desperate, delusional courage. He shoved his phone into his pocket and puffed his chest out, attempting to physically intimidate the much larger construction worker. "You are destroying my private property. I have legally binding notarized documents proving my mother is suffering from severe advanced dementia. She does not have the legal cognitive capacity to sell this house." Tom pressed the transmission button on his radio. "This is Site Manager Tom. I have 4 hostile, unauthorized individuals refusing to vacate the active demolition zone. Send the local authorities to the front perimeter right now." "You are making a massive legal mistake, buddy," Bradley screamed, pointing a shaking finger directly at the foreman's chest. "I am going to sue your entire commercial development company into total bankruptcy. I am going to have you personally thrown in jail for aggressive property destruction. We will see who goes to jail, Bradley." The calm, authoritative voice cut through the dusty air like a sharp physical blade. It did not come from the foreman or the construction crew working upstairs. It came from the shattered front entryway directly behind the panicked group. Bradley froze completely. The furious color drained rapidly from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified gray ghost. Stephanie slowly turned around, her eyes wide with sudden rising panic. The dust motes swirled wildly in the bright morning sunlight pouring through the open doorway. Bradley stared toward the entrance, completely trapped in the hollow, ruined shell of the kingdom he had so desperately tried to steal. I sat in the spacious leather back seat of a black town car, parked quietly across the street from the active demolition zone. The heavily tinted windows provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the complete psychological collapse currently unfolding in my former driveway. The air conditioning hummed softly inside the luxurious vehicle, creating a serene, isolated bubble that contrasted sharply with the aggressive, chaotic reality outside. I watched my son aggressively pointing his trembling finger at the large construction foreman. I watched his status-obsessed wife pulling frantically at her own matted hair, while her wealthy parents looked like they wanted the concrete sidewalk to open up and swallow them whole. Diane sat beside me with her posture perfectly straight, holding her slim leather briefcase resting on her knees. She radiated the calm, patient energy of an executioner waiting for the final signal. 2 local police detectives occupied the heavy, unmarked sport utility vehicle parked directly behind our town car. They were simply waiting for my definitive command. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the fabric of my practical linen trousers. For decades, I had poured every ounce of my maternal energy into protecting the boy currently screaming in the dust. I had shielded him from his own failures and financed his unearned arrogance. Today, I was finally laying that heavy, exhausting burden down forever. I reached for the metal door handle. Lucas stepped out of the passenger side first and immediately walked around to offer me his hand. I did not physically need his support to stand up, but I deeply appreciated his unwavering presence. He had matured a decade in the span of a single weekend. He stood tall and resolute, ready to witness the final consequence of his father's bottomless greed. We walked across the warm black asphalt as a unified front. Diane flanked my left side, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement. The 2 broad-shouldered detectives fell into step right behind us, their heavy-duty boots crunching over the scattered gravel and broken glass littering the street. Bradley spotted us first. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging slightly open as the furious red color instantly drained from his cheeks. He looked like a hollow gray shell. Stephanie stopped her shrill shrieking and grabbed her mother's arm, her eyes widening in absolute, unadulterated terror. Warren and Patricia turned to face us, their expressions shifting from wealthy indignation to sheer profound confusion. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to shout over the deafening roar of the heavy construction equipment operating inside the ruined house. My silence commanded the entire perimeter. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from my son and opened my purse. I pulled out a single thick white envelope and held it out toward him. Bradley stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely lift his arm, but the heavy, oppressive silence forced him to comply. He took the paper from my hand. I explained the contents clearly and methodically, allowing my voice to carry over the grinding mechanical noise. "Inside that envelope you will find a single brass key," I stated, my words slicing through the dusty air. "That key belongs to an UN air-conditioned storage unit located in the absolute worst industrial sector of the city. I paid for exactly 30 days of rent in cash. That metal box currently contains your wrinkled, tailored suits, your wife-imported designer handbags, and every single bottle of expensive cologne you own. If you do not retrieve your possessions before the month expires, the facility manager will drag everything out to the local dump." Stephanie let out a high-pitched, wounded gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. Her mother, Patricia, took a very slow, deliberate step away from her daughter. "There is a second document inside that envelope, Bradley." I continued, keeping my eyes locked dead onto his. "It is a formal foreclosure notice regarding the fraudulent $800,000 commercial line of credit you secured against my nursery properties. My corporate attorney unraveled the fraudulent transfer yesterday afternoon. The bank has officially terminated the holding company you created. That massive crushing debt is now entirely your own personal legal burden. You are completely financially ruined." Bradley ripped the envelope open, tearing the paper in his frantic haste. The small brass storage key fell onto the dusty concrete sidewalk with a sharp metallic ping. He stared down at the bold legal foreclosure notices, his eyes darting frantically across the pages as his enormous, fragile ego dissolved into pure, absolute terror. "Mom," he choked out, his voice sounding like a scared, lost child. "Mom, you cannot do this. You have to tell the bank it was a mistake. We will lose everything. We will go to prison." I did not offer him a single shred of comfort. I simply nodded to the two detectives standing quietly behind me. The lead detective stepped forward, the morning sun glinting off the heavy metal handcuffs resting on his utility belt. He addressed my son by his full legal name, and his voice carried the crushing weight of the federal justice system. "You are under arrest for aggravated wire fraud conspiracy to commit identity theft and felony elder abuse," the detective announced, grabbing Bradley's arm and spinning him firmly around. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." The metallic clicking sound of the heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around Bradley's wrists echoed loudly in the dusty suburban air. The sound marked the official permanent end of his arrogant, destructive life. Stephanie immediately erupted into chaotic, hysterical sobbing. She fell into the role of the desperate, innocent victim with terrifying speed. "It was all his idea," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at her handcuffed husband. "I did not know anything about the forged signatures or the fake medical evaluation. Bradley forced me to go along with the holding company. He told me it was standard estate planning. Mommy, you have to believe me. You have to hire me a defense lawyer right now." She reached out desperately toward her wealthy parents, expecting them to blindly open their checkbooks and shield her from the brutal consequences. Diane stepped forward and smoothly intercepted the frantic woman. The ruthless corporate attorney reached into her slim briefcase and extracted a printed stack of digital text messages. She did not hand the papers to Stephanie. She bypassed the crying woman entirely and handed the thick stack directly to Warren. "I highly recommend you read those transcripts before you waste a single penny of your private retirement funds on a legal defense," Diane suggested, her tone dripping with polite venom. "Your daughter was the primary architect of the entire conspiracy. She specifically orchestrated the cruelty of the canceled family cruise. She explicitly joked about locking her mother-in-law inside a psychiatric facility while she drank expensive wine on your dime." Warren read the top page of the printed text messages. His distinguished face twisted in absolute revulsion. He flipped to the second page, and his jaw tightened into a hard, unforgiving line. He looked at the printed evidence of his daughter, boundless greed and profound malice, and then he looked at the hysterical woman sobbing on the sidewalk. "We just spent $14,000 flying you home from Europe because you promised us a massive financial windfall," Warren said, his voice shaking with cold, upper-class fury. "You are a disgusting embarrassment to this entire family, Stephanie. Do not ever call our home number again." Warren took his wife by the arm and firmly guided her toward the waiting rideshare van. Patricia did not even look back at her daughter. They climbed into the vehicle and ordered the driver to leave immediately. They abandoned her on the dirty curb, choosing their own social preservation over their criminal child. Stephanie collapsed onto the dusty concrete, weeping hysterically, as her entire fabricated, luxurious world completely evaporated. She had no money, no home, no supportive family, and absolutely no future. The second detective stepped forward and placed his hands on her shoulders, hauling her roughly to her feet. He secured her wrists in metal handcuffs and read her the exact same Miranda rights he had just read to her husband. Bradley was pushed firmly toward the back of the unmarked police vehicle. He dragged his feet, stumbling awkwardly over the scattered gravel. He looked back over his shoulder, tears streaming rapidly down his pale face. The arrogant corporate manager was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, desperate shell of a man facing decades in a federal prison cell. "Mom, please," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a loud, agonizing sob. "Please, you have to stop them. I am sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. Please help me, Mom." I looked at him, standing in the shadow of the destroyed house he tried to steal. I looked at the man who had happily signed a fake medical document intended to strip away my basic human dignity. "I am not your mother anymore," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady. "I am just the woman who paid for everything." The detective placed his hand on top of Bradley's head and forced him down into the back of the police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, severing the connection between us forever. The second detective loaded Stephanie into the opposite side of the vehicle, ignoring her continuous shrill screaming. The unmarked sport utility vehicle pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the quiet suburban traffic and disappearing from my life completely. I turned my back on the empty, dusty street and looked at my grandson. Lucas was staring at the retreating police car, his expression a complicated mixture of heavy grief and profound relief. He had lost his father today, but he had successfully saved his own soul. "Let us go home, Lucas," I said, gently touching his arm. "We have a great deal of work to do." 6 months have passed since that dusty, chaotic morning in the suburbs. The changing seasons brought a deep, restorative peace to my life that I had not felt since my husband passed away. The sprawling suburban house was completely demolished within a week of the arrests. The aggressive commercial developer tore the foundation out of the earth and immediately began constructing 2 beautiful modern properties. I never drove past that specific neighborhood again. I simply deleted the address from my memory and focused entirely on the future. The federal prosecution moved forward with ruthless mechanical efficiency. Diane ensured that the digital evidence Lucas extracted from the computer was impeccably organized and legally bulletproof. The forged documents, the fake medical evaluation, and the recorded attempts to commit massive wire fraud from international waters left the defense attorneys with absolutely no room to maneuver. Bradley and Stephanie were both denied bail due to the severe flight risk and the overwhelming scale of the financial conspiracy. They sat in small concrete holding cells for months before finally accepting harsh plea deals to avoid a lengthy public trial. They were each sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary for aggravated elder abuse and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The corrupt wealth manager, Paul, received 8 years for his active role in the financial manipulation. I did not attend their sentencing hearings. I had absolutely no desire to look at their faces ever again. I was far too busy building a new empire. The massive investment portfolio I had secured inside the blind trust continued to generate substantial passive income. But rather than simply sitting on the accumulated wealth, I decided to put the money to aggressive, active use. I legally officially adopted Lucas, providing him with the stable, supportive family structure his greedy father had completely failed to deliver. When Lucas graduated with top honors from his university cybersecurity program, I did not buy him an expensive sports car or a lavish vacation. I bought him a commercial office space located directly in the bustling heart of the downtown tech district. I provided the initial seed funding to launch his very own independent digital security firm. We named the company Vanguard Data Protection. Lucas specializes in securing the complex digital assets of elderly clients and protecting vulnerable high-net-worth individuals from predatory family members and corrupt financial insiders. His business is thriving, growing exponentially every single month as word of his unique specialized expertise spreads through the corporate community. I currently spend my quiet, peaceful mornings in a brand new custom greenhouse I built behind my primary residence. I drink dark roast coffee and listen to classical music while pruning delicate imported orchids and repotting resilient ferns. The heavy toxic burden of managing an ungrateful, entitled son has been completely lifted from my shoulders. The air I breathe feels cleaner, and the vibrant colors of the blooming flowers look remarkably brighter. Sometimes, as I sit in the warm, humid air of the greenhouse, surrounded by the rich smell of damp earth and growing green things, I think about the concept of family loyalty. Society conditions us to believe that maternal love must be an endless, bottomless well of absolute, unconditional forgiveness. We are told to absorb the disrespect, to ignore the manipulation, and to continuously offer our resources to children who view us merely as stepping stones to their own unearned wealth. But I learned a very different lesson during those dark, frantic hours facing the destruction of my life work. I learned that respect is a mandatory prerequisite for love, and that absolute justice is far more important than maintaining a toxic biological tie. I learned that an empty house can be a beautiful, fresh start, and that the family you actively choose to build is infinitely stronger than the family you simply happen to birth. I sit in the sunlight and sip my warm coffee, feeling a profound, deep-seated tranquility. The garden centers continue to flourish under new, dedicated management. Lucas is actively building a brilliant, successful career, helping others defend their own hard-earned legacies. The predators are locked away in concrete cages, entirely forgotten by the world they tried so desperately to impress. A mother love is supposed to be completely unconditional, but so is fierce, uncompromising justice. Some people will inevitably look at my story and call me a ruthless, unforgiving woman. They will say I should have shown mercy to my own flesh and blood despite the severity of his terrible crimes. But as I water the fresh-growing seedlings and watch them push bravely toward the bright morning light, I know I made the only correct choice. I chose survival over submission, and I chose my own dignity over a lifetime of quiet abuse. Would you have let your own child go to federal prison, or did I take my vengeance just a little too far?